Shane Beamer naming LaNorris Sellers the starting quarterback for now brings more benefits than not. What are those benefits? We'll talk about that on today's Locked On Gamecocks.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also the lead publisher for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now as new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So Shane Beamer decided to give us all a pretty intriguing story on Monday evening as during one of his welcome home tour stops that he made in the Palmetto State, he took some time to speak to some of the local media who traveled out to see him. And he, of course, was asked almost in a nonchalant way, hey, are there any QB1 sort of stories that you're going to put out there tonight? Any talking points? And when Shaver was asked about that, he said that as he told the quarterback room coming out of spring practice, that LaNorris Sellers is currently the starting quarterback for the South Carolina Gamecocks. And I think that Shane Beamer doing this right now brings more pros than cons for this football team. Let's start off with the most obvious benefit to doing this. Shane Beamer and the staff are being fully transparent with this offense and with South Carolina's football team as a whole. Obviously, when you're talking about the starting quarterback position, it's a little bit different than trying to figure out who your starting punter is going to be or who one of your starting safeties are going to be. The quarterback position is the most important position on the entire team. And so you have to make sure that you're not being misleading to anybody else on the roster about who potentially could be the front runner to be in that spot this fall. And by telling people right now who the starting quarterback is, even if he didn't flat out say the competition is over, Shane Beamer is doing right by everybody. He is doing right by quarterback Robbie Ashford by at least letting him know where he currently stands in the quarterback competition. He's doing right by all of the guys that are likely going to be starting on the offensive side of the ball. The guys at wide receiver, the guys at running back, tight end, offensive line, you name it. Because now they have a better idea of who they are likely going to be working with when they start a practice once again this coming August in preseason camp. And the other thing is you avoid having any potential division being created in the locker room because whenever there's a starting quarterback battle, obviously you never really, or I should say you rarely get a 100% unanimous vote in terms of the locker room on who the starting quarterback should be. There's always at least usually a certain minority that is going to side with one quarterback that maybe is not the front runner from an outside perception standpoint. And that could be just because they like the guy a little bit more. They like hanging out with him a little bit more when they are not out there on the football field. But typically, you're going to have some minority compared to a majority when it comes to the locker room's perception on the starting quarterback job. So just getting all of it out of the way right now by saying, hey, as of this moment, LaNorris Sellers is a starting quarterback, that does nothing but bring good, in my opinion, to this program. The other reason why it is good for the staff to go ahead and get this out there right now is because LaNorris Sellers, he now knows that, hey, as of this very moment, as long as you don't mess up, this is basically your job to lose. Now, how do you handle that? Because LaNorris Sellers, listen, let's all just go ahead and get this out of the way. Last season, fans, probably people within the program, they looked at LaNorris Sellers as the heir apparent to Spencer Rattler. And I think for a very long time, LaNorris Sellers has probably felt that way himself. But now he has officially been told by this staff, who have tried very hard to keep him humble, of course, while going through these practices and off-season workouts, that, hey, our current expectation is that you are going to be the guy. You're going to be maybe the leader for this team this upcoming fall. So now that LaNorris Sellers has been told this, how does this affect him? How does this affect his habits on the field and off the field? Does LaNorris Sellers decide to kick it up a notch now? Does he decide to put even more effort into his workouts, into his quarterback drills on the field, into being more of a vocal leader? Because I think LaNorris Sellers has admitted himself that to this point, he's kind of been more of a lead by example kind of player, more so than a vocal player. And that's okay. Guys can decide that they're going to go out there and instead of telling young guys what to do or everybody else what to do, they're just going to show them how they go about their business and earn their respect that way. But it's a little bit different when you talk about the starting quarterback. In my opinion, a starting quarterback, and I should say the opinion of probably every football fan, the starting quarterback can't just be a guy that leads by example. The starting quarterback has to be a guy that's not afraid to be vocal, that's not afraid to use his voice to get his point across at certain times. And LaNorris Sellers, I believe during spring, he admitted that this was something that he was working on. This was something that he tried to get better at, something that he's tried to adjust to, knowing that, hey, this is something you're going to be expected to do if you're the starting quarterback for us this fall. And you know who's going to want to see that more than anybody else? Offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Dowell Loggins. And because Dowell Loggins comes from an NFL background, this kind of maybe minuscule stuff that we all look at as maybe a media member or as a fan, that Dowell Loggins does not view it that way. That kind of stuff is extremely important to a coach like Dowell Loggins. And so now that you have told LaNorris Sellers, you've gone ahead and given him the heads up that, hey, right now you're our guy. Now let's see if that changes you for better or for worse. Because when you go into fall camp, you got about a month before the season starts, right? And the way coaches usually break down fall camp is this. They use the first 2 weeks to continue to figure out, okay, who's going to be our starters, who are going to be our backups. And then once you get to the second to last week, or maybe a week and a half away from your first game, that's when you really want to start to practice like you're in season. That's when you want to have a defined first string and second string. You want to have a defined practice schedule, scout teams, and you want to start preparing for that week 1 opponent. So for South Carolina to go ahead and get quarterback out of the way, again, at least for the time being, South Carolina now can focus more of their attention on some other positions. You know, who's going to be our starting 5 along the offensive line? Who are going to be our starters at wide receiver? Another key position that is going to decide whether or not South Carolina makes it back to the postseason this next year. All those questions are almost just as important as the quarterback position. But now you've given Sellers the chance to show and back up what the staff believes in him. You've put the belief in him that, hey, we think you can be that guy. Now go show us and go show everybody why we have that belief in you in the first place. So I think that Shane Beamer doing what he did last night and going ahead and being open by saying LaNorris Sellers is our QB1, I think it brings more good than bad. But I do have to admit there is one potential downside to this decision to let this become public knowledge or even make a decision right now. A downside that could be a bit more harmful than maybe some people would acknowledge. And I'll talk about that downside in just a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner-take-all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. The Minnesota Timberwolves have shell-shocked the defending champs in the Denver Nuggets in the NBA playoffs to the point where FanDuel now is not very confident in the Nuggets' chances to win the Western Conference. As a matter of fact, the Nuggets odds are now listed at plus 700, the worst odds out of all the teams remaining in the Western Conference semis. So, do you think the Nuggets, now is the time to put some money on them when they are probably at their lowest? You think they could come back and beat the Timberwolves and still make it back to the NBA Finals? If you do believe so, now's a great time to put some money on that particular prop bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily choice for South Carolina Gamecock sports coverage. All right, we've talked about some of the obvious and hidden benefits to Shane Beamer naming LaNorris Sellers as South Carolina's current QB1 in that position room. Now, let's talk about the one potential downside to the Gamecocks going down this route of going ahead and making it known not just to the quarterbacks, but also to the public at large who their starting quarterback is at this moment, and that is the possibility that the Gamecocks lose Robbie Ashford mentally. Robbie Ashford has been through this situation before. I think he went through this a little bit at Oregon. He certainly went through this to a much greater extent with the Auburn Tigers. My whole point there is this. This is not Robbie Ashford's first rodeo. He's not some bright-eyed true freshman that's come in here and believes that he could just conquer any team and any player that stands in front of him. Robbie Ashford is a seasoned veteran of college football at this point. And so you're not going to fool that man easily with some casual jargon that maybe, just maybe, would make an impact on an impressionable true freshman that's just coming out of high school. Robbie Ashford at this point in his career is likely pretty good at reading the tea leaves as far as his current playing situation is concerned. And I will go ahead and say, I thought that Robbie Ashford played really well in South Carolina's spring game, and quite frankly, I think his performance would have been even better if he had been given a much more fair chance of showcasing what all he could do, but because of some O-line injuries that took place heading into the game, and him just working with the second stringers in general, it seemed like at least, Robbie Ashford, he had to scramble a lot instead of getting to sit back there in the pocket and try to show fans what he can do within structure in the Gamecocks offense. But here's where this could get a little bit scary, because again, we have to remember LaNorris Sellers, he is going to be a dual threat quarterback in this offense. He is a guy where South Carolina, they're going to need him to use his legs at times this upcoming season for them to have success. Robbie Ashford, you can kind of view him in the same way. And Robbie Ashford, look, Shane Beamer has already said before that when a guy is looking to transfer here and they have a conversation with him and they talk about playing time, the one thing he guarantees with them is they'll get a chance to compete for the starting job. He doesn't outright guarantee it. That's at least what Shane Beamer says, and I feel like we have to take him at his word. I don't think he would openly say that unless it was true otherwise. But Robbie Ashford, now that he knows, and now the general public knows, LaNorris Sellers is QB1 until further notice. How does he respond to that? Again, kind of similar to LaNorris Sellers, but in a different way. Does Robbie Ashford sort of mentally check out? Listen, it can be easy to do because quarterback is not like running back. It's not like wide receiver or playing along the defensive line because you don't rotate guys there. When you obviously get your quarterback, that guy's getting all of the snaps unless you have won in blowout fashion or you have lost a game in blowout fashion. That is it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so if you lose Robbie Ashford mentally, then you go into the season. And LaNorris Sellers, let's say week 2 against Kentucky, he gets banged up. He gets injured. he has to leave the game for at least the rest of a half, or maybe he can't even play the rest of the game. Now you've got a guy who is not maybe completely focused in a Robbie Ashford that goes out there, and you have to hope that he's going to be able to right the ship, right? And then when you talk about Robbie Ashford, you've also got to look at the guys behind him, because I don't think the gap between LaNorris Sellers and Robbie Ashford is quite as big as the gap between Robbie Ashford and the rest of the quarterbacks behind him right now. If you watch the spring game, after Robbie Ashford and LaNorris Sellers pretty much were done for the night, I think it was pretty clear and evident that, yeah, if South Carolina gets into a danger zone type situation where they have to go to a third quarterback, they are in trouble. And listen, you could say that about a lot of programs. You could say that about other teams in the SEC alone. I understand that. But South Carolina, listen, they already don't recruit well enough across the board at every position to where they can handle having a bunch of injuries. They do that at certain spots, but not every spot. And right now, I'd say quarterback is one of those spots, because think about it. Davis Beville transferred in from Oklahoma. I believe this is his 5th or 6th year now of college football. He's only attempted 62 career passes. Dante Reno is as true as a true freshman can be. He literally left charter school, I think, basically early in his senior season to come here and go through spring practice. Luke Doty, sure, if you got to a point where you needed a third quarterback, I mean, heck, right now, Luke Doty would probably be your best option. But Luke Doty, he's no longer just solely a quarterback. Yes, he stays involved in terms of film and everything, but it's not 2021 anymore. It's 2024, and Luke Doty's role in this team is a little bit different than it was just a few years ago. So, naming LaNorris Sellers as your starting QB right now, the only downside that it can bring, and I don't think it should be overlooked, is you potentially lose Robbie Ashford from a mental standpoint. And sure, I can already hear some people sitting there saying, well, if you were going to lose Robbie Ashford mentally because he's not the starting quarterback right now, then maybe he just doesn't have the right mentality to play in the league in the first place. I already know some people are going to say that, and I don't fully disagree with you if that's indeed what ends up happening. But that doesn't matter. Your feelings on it don't really matter. It's still going to impact the team in a negative way if this is indeed what takes place behind closed doors. If Robbie Ashford just goes, great, I thought I had a real shot to win this quarterback job. This is my 3rd school now in my college football career, and I've lost another one. You know, that can really weigh down on somebody at a certain point, especially if you're someone that feels like that you're putting your entire heart and soul into this, and it's just not going your way. That happens at some point. So you got to hope that for this offense's sake and for the quarterback room's sake, that does not take place with Robbie Ashford. So again, while I think it brings more good than bad to say right now LaNorris Sellers is your starting quarterback, this is a potential negative that we're going to have to pay attention to as the offseason progresses and see if it's legitimate, see if it does have an impact on Robbie Ashford if and when he does get some snaps maybe this upcoming season. Now, speaking of loss, Lamont Paris and the men's basketball program, they lost one of their 2024 signees on Tuesday afternoon as Trent Noah got a release from his national letter of intent. So how does this impact South Carolina's roster heading into this next season? Is it going to have a big impact, or does it have little to no impact at all? We'll talk about that in a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already have talked about this, but there's just so much good stuff in Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get in Monopoly Go. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. You can also get cool new playing pieces pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini-games, like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. All right, let's talk a little bit of men's basketball now. As Lamont Paris and the Gamecocks look, they've had a lot of good news to discuss as of late. But today, unfortunately, we got to talk about some bad news, as the Gamecocks lost 2024 signee Trent Noah. Now, Trent Noah, he got a release from his national letter of intent, and he stated specifically in sort of his goodbye post, I guess, to Gamecock Nation, that he is looking to play closer to home, which probably means, if I had to take a wild guess, that the Kentucky Wildcats might get involved here now that there's been a wholesale staff change there and they have a new head coach in Mark Pope. So obviously, wish Trent Noah all the best of luck. If that is indeed what he wants to do, in all honesty, you cannot blame the kid. 18 years old, one of the biggest decisions of his young life to this point. Being able to play for your home state team, if he has that opportunity to do that, it's a pretty big deal for someone like him. So congrats to him if that is indeed the case. But where does this leave South Carolina? Well, if you want me to give my honest opinion on this, I really don't think this impacts the Gamecocks all that much. Now, sure, it sucks that you don't have Trent Noah coming into the program this offseason. I'm not trying to make it out like this is not a loss at all. I do think that this is a loss for Lamont Paris, because Trent Noah, he was a very unheralded signing for the South Carolina Gamecocks in this cycle. Was, I believe, a 3-star, sort of a fringe top 150 player all the way back in October, November, and then going through his whole senior season and then the Kentucky State playoffs, everybody saw up close and personal, wow, this kid's got some skill. And it did get to a point where some Kentucky fans even were saying, we kind of hate that this kid is leaving our state, and not to mention he's committed to an SEC foe of ours. So obviously now they don't have to worry about that anymore, at least in that regard with South Carolina. But this does mean now that your wing position, it does go back down to really just Zachary Davis, Miles Studi, and then you still have an Arden Conyers, obviously, from, I believe, 2 recruiting classes ago, but Conyers redshirted this past year, and it's still unclear whether or not he is ready to play some legitimate minutes at the Power 5 level this upcoming basketball season. However, the important thing to still remember with this team, now that the offseason is pretty much completed in terms of roster construction, or is it, is that they still have a good 10 deep on this roster. And if you're South Carolina, that's really what you want. You want to start the season with a solid 10 guys that you can lean on night in and night out. Then when you get to conference play, maybe you trim down the minutes a little bit. You cut it down to 9 players. And then once you get to the postseason, you want to have a solid 8. If you have a 9th, that's fantastic. But you want to have at least 8 players that you feel pretty comfortable with and you can trust to go out there and play 26, 28 plus minutes every single game. And the Gamecocks still have that. You look at the front court. They've got Nick Pringle from Alabama. Jordan Butler from Missouri gets to sit for a year and learn behind Nick Pringle. Power forward, you've got Colin Murray-Boyles coming back for another season, and you've got Aku Federico coming in from Finland as a part of this 2024 class. Small forward, or the wing spot, you still have Zachary Davis, and you got Miles Studi coming back for another year. Shooting guard, probably going to be a mixture of Cam Scott, Jacoby Wright, and Morris Ugasuk. Wright and Ugasuk obviously are kind of combo guards. And Scott, who knows, maybe he could play a bit of a small forward as well if he needs to. And then at point guard, you've got Jamari Thomas now from Norfolk State. So you've got 10 guys right there, and that's not even including, say, Benjamin Bozeman for Donk, who has played now for 2 years under Lamont Paris, and as of right now, it seems like is coming back for another season, so he could also help out in the front court as well. My point is, though, you still got your 10 guys. And while it does stink that you don't have Trent Noah now as a part of that mix anymore, the thing is, Lamont Paris can still go into the transfer portal and get another guy this next offseason if he feels like he needs to. And it's not like Lamont Paris has to use this last scholarship. Heck, last offseason, Lamont Paris didn't use all of his scholarships. I believe he carried one empty scholarship spot going into the 2023-24 season. And at first, fans were kind of, a bit skeptical about him not using that last scholarship, and I kind of was along with them. But, we saw how that worked out. South Carolina won 26 games because what mattered at the end of the day was they brought the right guys in terms of skill set and makeup into the program. That's what matters. It's not just filling out every roster spot because you have to. What kind of guys are you bringing in? And I think that as it has been made perfectly clear now by a lot of people that follow the program this offseason, that Lamont Paris has brought in the right guys. A lot of South Carolina natives, guys that are going to help them elevate their play in certain areas. And overall, still a lot of experience to look at when you look at the construction of this roster, the composition of this roster, heading into this next basketball season. So, at the end of the day, does it hurt to have Trent Noah now out of the 2024 class and now looking like he's going to potentially an SEC opponent? Yes, it does. It still does hurt. Is it devastating? No, I wouldn't say it's devastating. I think that South Carolina, listen, if you turn around, have another, let's say 20-plus win season, make it back to the NCAA tournament, that would be 2 years in a row in both of those regards. You're going to have plenty of opportunities to find another Trent Noah, another guy that, hey, is a bit underrated and under the radar when you discover him, but then by the time they're done, they have blossomed into a legitimate prospect that Power 6 programs are very intrigued by. Lamont Paris, I think, has proven at this point he's got a good eye for talent, both when it comes to the high school ranks and also definitely when it comes to the transfer portal, and also is a master at meshing that with, okay, how are they going to fit the system? How are they going to fit the locker room culture? I think Lamont has proven, although in a very short time, he's very good at all of that. So I would say, listen, trust Lamont Paris. Trust him. Trust the staff. I don't think any Gamecock fan's going to have an issue with doing that right now. I think at the end of the day, they'll do what's best for the program. If they feel like they got to go and get another guy, then heck, sure, they could go. I would probably imagine it would be in the portal. I don't really think there's anyone else in the high school ranks because it wouldn't make sense to go into the high school ranks. Take a chance on a guy that you've barely probably looked at for several months now. And plus, a lot of these guys are signed at this point, and you would have to wait for someone to get a release from their national letter of intent before being able to do anything. So needless to say, I think the Gamecocks are going to be just fine, even though it does stink that Trent Noah is no longer going to be a part of their plans for this upcoming season. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show as always. What are your thoughts on the pros and cons of Shane Beamer naming LaNorris Sellers the current starting quarterback for South Carolina's football team? And lastly, what are your thoughts on the men's basketball team losing out on Trent Noah? Do you think that it has a profound impact, or do you think it has little to no impact at all? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watch this show on YouTube, or you could shoot me a direct message on X at @ALion_SC if you listen to this show on an audio podcast app. As always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.